So we're going to continue our study in the book of Nehemiah. I like Nehemiah because God interrupted his life because he had something more for Nehemiah than Nehemiah had for himself. And I hope that God will disturb us and interrupt our life. I think he's doing that right now. I think he's doing that in our church. I think he's interrupting our rhythm. And he's trying to get our attention because I think God has something more for us. And I think God has something more for you and for me. But sometimes we got to get disturbed first. And that's what happened with Nehemiah. He's a cupbearer to the king of Persia, Artaxerxes. And one day word comes that he hears about the disgrace and the plight of people hundreds of miles away. And instead of, why should I care? It's not my problem. He's gripped in his heart with what he heard. And he begins to agonize over it, and he weeps over it. And he comes out of that, I've got to do something. I've got to do something with what's bursting in my heart. And it drives him to go before the king and ask for permission and the resources to go to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls and restore the gates that have been burnt down and destroyed over time. And then the next thing he does, he goes to Jerusalem and he walks the city streets by himself. Then he goes to the leaders and they surprisingly vote yes. They said, let's do this. And then they go before the people, and their people are willing to step up. If it was just the leaders without the people, nothing would have happened. If it was just Nehemiah with a vision and nobody agreed with it, then it would have just been a dreamer. But the leaders agreed, and then the people, they said, you know what, let's do this. And they offered the different things that they could do. And that's what's made our church over the years, is people that have brought what they can to the table. Say, I want to serve, I want to help, I want to do my part. And then the building starts to happen, and the wall starts to come up, and then they get opposition, and then people are attacking them and coming against them. But in chapter 5, where we hit today, the opposition is not from the outside, it's from the inside. The church of Jesus has always stood strongly against outside forces to tear it down. Our Achilles heel has always been the inside, when we destroy ourselves by disunity. When the enemy, when the evil one attacks you and me, he begins to, from the outside it's one thing, but then he wants to get inside of us to try to derail us from God's plan for our life, from God's purposes for our life. And I'm sick of it. I'm tired of us being ripped off by God has so much more than we're living out. And one of his favorite weapons, the evil one, is this thing called selfishness. Putting ourselves at the center of the universe, where it becomes all about me. Church becomes all about me. Marriage becomes all about me. Work becomes all about me. What do I get? What's in it for me? And that's in the water. It's in our culture. Everybody thinks about everything like that. What do I get? What's the angle? What's for me? And so I think that's one of the weapons of the evil one, to neutralize the church and to take away our ability to come together and really make a difference in our world. I love what our young pastor Jeff Faust has said a number of times, that I've really been captured by it. And I'm not sure he made this up or he got it somewhere, but he says there are two kinds of people when they walk into a room. One is, here I am, or the second one is, there you are. Here I am versus there you are. Now, I wonder which one are you? Don't raise your hand. If you're honest with yourself, when you walk into a room, when you came into church today, when you're in this room, was this a, here I am, or was it, there you are? I think it's a huge idea. Which one are you? And which one was Nehemiah? I think it's kind of obvious that Nehemiah was not about what do I get, because for him to follow God and do what he's doing, he's going to give up his comfort. He's going to give up all of his perks, everything that he has going for him, to go to a city with a whole new group of people and do this crazy thing. And it's not about him. Even when he meets with the elders and the leaders of the city, he said, let us rebuild this. He said, we have a problem. He identified with them. It always happens when I'm up here. And so Nehemiah, it wasn't about him, and that's why God used him. That's why God was able to use him. When life isn't centered around you or centered around me. Thomas Merton said it best, I think. Brace yourself. To consider persons and events and situation only in light of their effect upon myself is to live on the doorstep of hell. That's a pretty big statement. I think that's worth a rego. To consider persons and events and situation only in light of their effect upon myself, me, is to live on the doorstep of hell. When we get into chapter 5, there's an outcry for justice among the people because things aren't well. They're getting the work done and they're doing this, but there's a group of people that are experiencing a lack of justice. There's a crisis that could bring everything to a halt, could stop the building of the wall. And it's not from the enemies outside, it's from what's happening on the inside. And so the issue is brought to the attention of Nehemiah, and we're going to see, what is he going to do? Let's go for it. About this time, some of the men and their wives, when their wives are in it with the men, you know you got a real deal. You know that, don't you? They raised a cry of protest against their fellow Jews. They were saying, we have such large families, we need more food to survive. Others said, we have mortgaged our fields, our vineyards, and homes to get food during the famine. That kind of gives an insight of the backstory of what's going on during this time with the famine. Others said, we have had to borrow money, listen to this, on our fields and vineyards to pay for our taxes. We belong to the same family as those who are wealthy, and our children are just like theirs. Yet we must sell our children into slavery. That was happening. Just to get enough money to live. We have already sold some of our daughters. And we are helpless to do anything about it. For our fields and vineyards are already mortgaged to others. This was a real deal. Jew against Jew. Jews were exploiting Jews. This, my friends, is maybe the biggest challenge of all to the mission that Nehemiah had. There are 4 groups that are identified here. The first one were people who owned no land, but they needed food, and they cried out to Nehemiah for help. The second were landowners who mortgaged their property to buy food. The third group complained because the taxes were so high, they were forced to borrow, and then they had to give up security and then sell their sons and daughters into slavery to pay for it. The fourth group were the wealthy Jews who were exploiting their own brothers and sisters by loaning them money with interest and then taking their land. And now it all comes to Nehemiah, the information of what is he going to do. In verse 6, when I heard their complaints, I was very angry. That means in the Greek, I was ticked off. After thinking it over, listen to this. I spoke out against these nobles and officials. I told them, you are hurting your own relatives by charging interest when they borrow money. Basically, Nehemiah turns and says, what are you doing? Why are you exploiting one another? How could you be doing this? There was a righteous anger on display. And you know what? Sometimes, anger can be very destructive. Do you know that? How many have ever done something stupid out of anger? You say something, you do something, it's like, and that happens. Ephesians 4:26 says, in your anger, do not sin. That there's a time to be angry, but not sin in that. The anger of Nehemiah was justified and holy against the sin of exploiting the poor. So you can be angry and not sin. By the way, some things should make you angry. Some things that you see, some things that happen, some things that are unjust that happen to you and people you love and people you don't even know should bother you. It should make you angry when you see something happening about that. But hopefully it makes us angry enough to do something about it. So now Nehemiah takes the next step. He calls a public meeting. He said, we're going to deal with this. We're not going to sweep this under the carpet. We're not just going to continue the work. Sometimes ministries like that, it's about the mission and it's about what we're supposed to do, and people don't matter. We're crushing each other and people are stepping on each other. But it really does matter to Nehemiah because he knows if he doesn't solve this, that it's all going down the wrong way. So he calls for a meeting after he took time to cool off on this thing, to calm down before speaking out. That's such an important thing. Proverbs 16:32 might be helpful for some of us, some of you. He who is slow to anger, listen to this, is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. If we can't control ourselves, we'll never be successful in making a difference in anybody else's life. If we can't control our emotions, it's anger under control. One thing I want to encourage you, maybe you haven't done this, please don't email, tweet, or text when you're angry. One more time. Please, 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 please. And don't text me. Email, text, or email when you are angry. It will backfire. What goes out and you calm down, but it doesn't calm down. Anybody ever experienced something like that? You did something and you said something and it's like, and you can't get that back. So Nehemiah steps up after calming down and not just blowing out people, but now he's going to take action in this. I love the words of Proverbs 31 because Nehemiah steps up and expresses something that he would have known, from the Proverbs, which says, speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves. That's happening right in front of them. These people have no power. They have no ability to fix their situation. They're being exploited and they have no voice. They have no power. And he goes on to say, to ensure justice for those being crushed. And he says, yes, speak up for the poor and the helpless. And then he adds a little extra, and see that they get justice. I think that's a call of God on us. That we are to be the ones in our world, on this planet, that when there is injustice and people are treated unjustly, that we speak up for them, but we see that they get justice. We see that things are made right to the ability that we have, to the voice that we actually have. Now, I think it's interesting with the people here, but especially in our world. There's no qualification in Proverbs about how people got in their situation. Sometimes we decide whether we're going to help people because we evaluate how they got there in that situation. When people are being crushed by those more powerful, listen, when people are being crushed by those more powerful, we are to step up and see they get justice. That's the deal. That is the deal. That is our deal. Like the story of the Good Samaritan, that this is not limited to our people, our nation, our race, our religion, my family, but to anyone that's being crushed and in need of justice. And it's a powerful mandate. A guy named Martin Niemöller, from a very famous person, from a Protestant pastor who opposed Hitler during 7 years of Nazi Rome concentration camp. Imagine being in Nazi Germany when it was all going down. Here's what he said, and he's most famous for this. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Sometimes when we look out and we see the plight of others, we remove ourselves, not recognizing that could actually be me on the other side of it. Listen to the words of Micah the prophet. O people, the Lord has told you, interesting, told you what is good and what the Lord requires of you. To do what's right, justice. To love mercy. I love the love mercy piece in this. Love mercy is you look for opportunities to give people what they don't deserve, which is what we've gotten from God, what we don't deserve. That you love showing mercy. You love looking for people and reaching out to people that don't deserve it. They haven't earned it. They haven't done anything to warrant your attention or your help or even looking their way. And then lastly, to walk humbly with our God. I like that part because on the other side of any injustice, my friends, it could be you. If you're on the other side of being abused, sexually molested, exploited, or whatever the case might be, what would you want somebody else to do for you that saw you in that circumstance or situation? Would you want them to say, you're not my problem, sorry, I'm too busy, sorry? But Micah tells us the Lord requires that we look for justice. We love mercy, to show mercy, love showing mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. So now what's Nehemiah going to do? How's he going to deal with this? He's got a mess on his hands. But he rises up, and at the meeting he said, I said to them, these are his memoirs, by the way, we are doing all we can to redeem our Jewish relatives who have had to sell themselves to pagan foreigners. That's the reality that they were in with the Persians and being exploited. But you are selling them back into slavery again. How often must we redeem them? And they had nothing to say in their defense. But he's not done. I press further. What you are doing is not right. There are times in your life, in my life, that something is just simply not right. When somebody's being bullied, when somebody's being slandered, when something's going down on somebody's head, there's something that's not right and you're there. There's a voice that you have to use in those moments. What you are doing is not right. Should you not walk in the fear of our God in order to avoid being mocked by enemy nations? I myself, as well as my brothers and workers, have been lending the people money and grain. But now, let us stop this business of charging interest. And that is it's not even done yet. Let's stop this. This practice is wrong. What we are doing is wrong. And he becomes part of it. What we are doing is wrong and needs to stop. But now he goes to the proactive. You must restore their fields. Get this right. You catch that? You must restore their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, and homes to them this very day. Not tomorrow, not next week, not someday. You're going to make it right here and right now. What a powerful moment. And Nehemiah is presenting this to them right here. And they replied, surprisingly, actually, we will give back everything and demand nothing more from the people. We will do as you say. I wonder if that was reluctantly. I wondered if there was needed a voice. Sometimes the right thing to do is a little obscure until a voice is raised. You know, when one stands up to a bully, it's never one, then it's 2, 3, and 4. When there's something that's wrong and somebody said, that's wrong, there's all of a sudden there's people that rally to I wonder if that's happening. I wonder if they were just doing it and nobody stood up to it. Nobody even mentioned it. So it just kind of went down. But on this day, one man uses his voice to stand up and say, this is wrong, it needs to stop, and this is what we need to do. And it's almost like the eyes of the people, were open. And it was not like Nehemiah was shaming them. He was calling them to a reality to see what they were doing. I wonder if people that are exploiting people and abusing, if they just need maybe that wake-up call from somebody that says, stop it. Stop this, what you're doing. And so it's a powerful moment when they respond. And so he's not done. He says, I called the priest and made the nobles and the officials swear to do what they had promised. He went to the leaders. He said, this is not just going to be, a little bravado here. This is something that's got to go down. And so he got the nobles and the priests and the officials on board to swear. And then he adds this. Listen to this. I shook out the folds of my robe and said, if you fail to keep your promise, may God shake you like this from your homes and from your property. That's a moment. I said, Nehemiah knows how to pray. He's praying some really tough prayers if you've been following this. And now he says, if you don't do this, my prayer for you is that God will shake you from your homes, just like you've shaken them from their homes. That God will do to you what's been done to them. If you fall back on your promise, if this is just, if you break this promise, if you don't mean this. So you talk about raising a voice. Nehemiah lets them know that they will stand before God and give an account. I don't stand before God for you, and you won't stand before God for me, but we each stand before God. Interesting that in the book of James it says that when you know what's right to do, James says, and you fail to do it, for you it's sin. See, we really major on the sins that are obvious, that we violate this standard or this or whatever, but the sin of omission is something that the church needs to awaken to when there's something right to do. And next that we hear that the whole assembly responded, amen. And they praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. You know, I kind of find when I'm reading this and they praise the Lord, it's like they were grateful that somebody spoke the truth to them. That somebody had the nerve, the guts, the courage to rise up in the midst of this and say something and do something. And the people who were doing it even, they were grateful. And they honored God in that. If there ever was a time, my friends, for the people of God to rise up, I think it's for such a time as this. So what do we do with this? I want to give you some takeaways. But all of this happened because one man dared to raise his voice and demand justice for somebody else. See, Nehemiah could have just went on and said, well, you guys lose, but we're going to get it done, and then I'm out of here. It doesn't really matter. Well, it did matter because people matter. So my takeaway question, what makes you angry in your family? What makes your blood boil? What riles you up? What the righteous anger, the indignation that's not because somebody makes you mad, I'm talking about something goes down. It's like, it makes you really angry. A second question, who do you need to speak up for? What do you need to stand up for? Somebody you know, something you feel. Who's out there? Who needs you to stand up for them? And a third piece is, who can you join with? Who can you join? I mentioned earlier, you know, when you raise your voice, you will never be a lone voice when there's injustice. You might be the first voice, but you won't be the last voice. But for some of us, some of you, it's not about raising your voice when there are no voices. It's joining your voice to those voices that are already there. Are you hearing me? It's listening for those voices and adding your voice and making your stand with others that have made a stand with what's in your heart to do, what matters to you. You join with others. One way you can do it practically here, you can join with us in our outreach and our compassion and in our missions here at the church. But we have partners like Harvest Farm and the Rescue Mission down the street, Arms of Love, Convoy of Hope, Habitat for Humanity, Serve 6.8, Alpha Center for Women, the Fort Collins Safe House, Compassion International. There's all kinds of groups doing wonderful things that would welcome your voice and your participation. So it's not that you got to go out and do this on your own. But the last one here I'd like to add is that you need to start small with what you see. Somebody shared with me earlier today that they went all the way across the world to North Korea and doing some, crazy mission stuff and ministry stuff there, outrageous stuff. And then they realized that their next door neighbor was being abused, that things were going down right next door. And they were trying to go correct something way over there and it was right here. Something happening right next door. And they didn't know it. They had no idea what was happening. So my question on this one was, what or who is in front of you? Start with the one that you know and what you know and who you see. And go from there. It doesn't have to be something big, but it has to be something. And I think it's the power of the church. The power of the church is not how many people gather on a Sunday morning to sing some songs and hear somebody talk. It's about what happens in our lives as a result of all of that. And I think God has already deposited things in you and me. That God's already at work all over the place. And he's inviting you and me in to pieces of that and part of that. And we've been talking about that. So my final question for you is, what's in your heart right now? That just doesn't go away. Hasn't gone away. And maybe, you're on the older side of life, but there's stuff there that still bothers you. You still have a voice. You still have a voice. And there's still people to stand next to. So what I'd like to do in our closing time, part of our response time is we have the cross in the back. We have communion and prayer. And you can give as well. And I want to know what God has put in your heart. And let's start there. Let's start with who you need to speak up for, stand up for. That's already a part of you. So I'm going to mention a number of things. And as I mention them, I want you to stand for those people and representing those people. And if there's more than one, after you're standing, you can just raise a hand, or two, or if you got three, raise all three. So here's the first one, Vineyard family. How many of you in your heart is human trafficking and the whole sexual exploitation of the vulnerable? Would you stand? Bullying, stand. Racial reconciliation, stand or raise your hand. Poverty prevention and mitigation, stand. Child abuse, stand. Sexual abuse and assault victims, please stand. The unborn, stand for them. Gang violence mediation, stand. Low-income housing, stand. Homelessness, disabled vets, mental health intervention, alcohol and drug rehab and rescue, refugees, immigrants, who will stand for them. People with special needs and disabilities, would you stand for them? Single parents, moms and dads, widows and the elderly and the dying, orphans, those without families. Wow. And if there's something I missed that's in your heart, stand for them. Just stand for them right now. Now look around the room, Vineyard family, with our hands up. Look at this. We are the church. And God has placed different pieces of the puzzle in all of us. And I pray, Father, that you would, Lord, enlarge our hearts like you did Nehemiah. When he walked the streets of that city to see for himself the disgrace and the discouragement and the devastation of people's lives, God. I ask, Lord, that you take away our fear of getting too close or getting hurt or getting too involved or not knowing what to do, God. I pray, Lord, that you would bury your heart, Papa God, in the heart of your church here at the Vineyard today. And Lord, it's all bigger than any of us can do, but Lord, you can do something. You did that with Nehemiah, and you can do it with us, God. And I ask, Lord, that you would fill us with your Holy Spirit, that you would empower us, oh God. Yes, Lord. That you would pour out your Spirit upon your church, Lord, and you would release your church, this church, Lord, out in our community, out and about in our neighborhoods, in our schools, and everywhere that we are, God. Lord, that we raise our voice and we lend our voice to other voices, God. I ask that you would show us what to do.